Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Tool album, Fear Inoculum. This is the latest album from alternative metal band Tool, a record that comes 13 years after the release of their last album in 2006, 10,000 Days. Tool's incredibly short but flawless discography has aged to be the envy of metal bands across the genre. It's inventive, it's progressive, it's unique, it's cutting edge. What's even more miraculous is the band was able to achieve some pretty great commercial success with it during a time when most mainstream metal was being dominated with these really tacky fusions of groove metal and hip-hop and funk. Not a great time for metal music, but I do remember it pretty vividly because I lived through it and loved most of it. But even as I slowly over the years fell out of love with this era of mainstream metal, Tool continued to age much better than their less substantive contemporaries, with psychedelic effects and intriguing song concepts, meditative grooves, odd time signatures, enchanting visual art. Also, this uniquely hypnotic and dark sound on key tracks like Sober, Stinkfist, 46 and 2, Schism, and Lateralis. Let's also not forget about the band's incredibly dynamic songwriting, as well as frontman Maynard James Keenan's beckoning, impassioned lead vocals. Yes, at times they do ooze pretension, but they are still some of the most compelling in modern metal. Being a big fan of Tool's music when I was younger, I could go on listing the band's important musical characteristics. And I feel obligated to because so much has occurred in the 13-year gap between this and the band's last record. Most importantly, the shift of music consumers from music stores to streaming platforms for their auditory entertainment needs, which Tool has only adapted to recently. Now, of course, this exciting adaptation to the information age comes along with the release of this new album. Tool fans have waited a long time for this moment. I've always found it sad the band didn't keep it up after 10,000 Days, but assumed that, hey, maybe they just didn't feel like it was the right time, they didn't have the right music, there was something else going on. They will come back to a new record, to a new project when they feel like they have something to say. And as far as statements go, Fear Inoculum is Tool's largest so far at 90 minutes in length, which is mostly spread out amongst these 6 massive tracks and broken up by a handful of different interludes. I'm not going to beat around the bush though. This is Tool's worst album. Now, you can rationalize that if you want and say, hey, Anthony, Tool's back catalog is mostly perfect, if not near perfect. Just because this album doesn't reach those impossibly high standards, it doesn't mean that it's bad. And yeah, I guess that's true, but there are legitimate reasons as to why Fear Inoculum doesn't really live up to the standard of past Tool records and isn't even really that great to begin with. The biggest issues with this LP were already forecast by the title track that was teased weeks before the release of this thing. There were some pretty impressive characteristics to make note of though. The performance across the entirety of the track was engaging, Maynard's vocal switch-ups across the song were pretty cool, but the production was maybe just a little too clean, and the worst thing about this track is that the writing was absolutely flavorless. So by the numbers for a Tool song, so basic, not nearly as intricate or as direct or as exciting as I typically would like a Tool song to be. I mean, the bass and guitar lines on this track sound like something the band's written at least a few times already. And sadly, as we go deeper into the album, the writing continues to be an issue. A glaring issue, to the point where it's blatantly uninspired and even leads to some really lackluster songwriting. Do you remember a time when Tool used to write these distinct, catchy, and complex guitar and bass parts and attach them to stunning choruses and haunting lyrical mantras? Yeah. Not so much the case for Fear Inoculum. On the very next song here, Pneuma, as well as with other tracks on this record, it sounds as if Tool are just writing these Morse code messages in 7/8 time using metal guitars, and that's it. The meditative grooves are there, but they are delivered so flatly, and there is so little in terms of distinct melodic color across many of them. Even on one of the better tracks here, Invincible, around the midway point, the band transitions into what could only be categorized as mindless chugging. It just happens to occur over an odd time signature, and that's it. Which is a gimmick you're only going to get so much mileage out of. For the love of God, this is not a gent record. But despite the lack of interesting anything going on here, Tool drags these passages out as if they just discovered fire or something. This is so rudimentary, you are above this, and aesthetically what's going on is so plain and bare too. The surprise drum solo in the second half of this track is drier than a desert, and the phased out synth leads that come not too long after sound horrendous, not really a reflection of a band that over a decade ago had a pretty fantastic approach to sound play. I just wish around the 5 minute and 44-second mark on this song, we just transitioned into maybe the last 2 minutes of the track and then that was it. That would have been great. I have similar feelings about the track Descending, whose guitar work in its initial moments is kind of average for Tool again, but Maynard's vocal work on the song definitely saves it a bit. It's pretty compelling. The harmonies that he delivers are great. But you see, this is just the first section of the song. We have to span it out for 10 minutes. Why, I don't know, but we have to. And at around the 7-minute mark, we suddenly get into these very punctuated, staccato, throbbing bass lines and slide electric guitar. It sounds like a horrendous combination of progressive alternative metal and just a cheap blues rock. But there's still loads of time left past this point, so why not throw in some soaring guitar solos and also some weird, awkward analog synth leads that sound like there's something out of a John Carpenter soundtrack, you know, all stuff that goes together and makes sense. The only 2 tracks on the record that I thought were actually good were the song Culling, Voices, which I don't think has the boldest writing on the entire record or the most explosive performance, but it is one of the most legitimately meditative songs on the entire record, and for the length of the song from front to back, there is no tomfoolery going on or no ridiculous experiments or ideas that the band just tries their hand at and utterly fails. And then we have the song Tempest, which is the most explosive cut on the entire record. The riffs the band builds up to on this track are pretty exciting. They hit hard. Even the more low-key moments are very hypnotic and very enchanting. I don't even mind the jammier sections of the song, given what the band is jamming over is pretty good. But that noodly riff on this song that pops up around 7:43 and then again at 11 minutes or so that the drums sync up with very nicely, that and almost that alone is the most unique and interesting and complex and flashy bit of guitar work across this entire album. I wish I could say there were more moments on this thing that really stood out to me in that way, but there weren't. As far as the ambient interludes that I haven't really gone into detail with yet across the record, they're all bad. They're all terrible. They're not good at all. Again, not a reflection of a band that had a really great approach to sound play and sound experimentation over a decade ago. The interludes do not add anything to the flow of this album. They don't segue into or out of any of the songs on this thing creatively. They're just all awful filler. Even the track Chocolate Chip Trip, which I will now proceed to try to say 5 times fast. Chocolate chip trip, chocolate chip trip, chocolate chip trip, chocolate chip trip, chocolate chip trip. Damn, I got it. This track's not really an interlude. It's more like an elongated drum solo. And I mean, the rhythms on this track are great, but the synthesizer thrown in is horrendous. Another bad synth part on this album that didn't really need to be there. Yes, this Tool record I found to be patience testing, not very enjoyable, not really up to snuff with anything the band has put out up until this point. Writing is not very good, and unfortunately, even though I think the band is performing pretty well, they're playing real tight on this thing. It's affected the quality of these songs greatly. Unfortunately, I think Tool has really fallen off here. I'm feeling a decent 2 strong 4 on this one. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Tool, Fear Inoculum, forever.